Cars here, not in Canada. We used to build cars in Canada. Now, the Canada cars, the Canadians are moving here to build cars. Same thing with Mexico. Same thing with Japan.
Here's the moment that tells you everything. One leader stands in front of cameras insisting that Canada doesn't matter. At that exact same time, another leader steps off a plane in Beijing onto a red carpet, greeted with ceremony, senior officials, and an invitation personally extended by President Xi. Two images. Two realities. If you believe the path forward is built on progress and inclusion, hit that subscribe button. Let's make this community the strongest voice for democracy online. Now listen closely, this is the tell. While Donald Trump was downplaying Canada's importance, Mark Carney was being received at the highest diplomatic level China can offer. Not a routine visit. Not a courtesy handshake. A state-level welcome. The first Canadian Prime Minister to visit in 8 years. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens when a country sees strategic value. And here's what that really exposes. Trump's dismissal, Canada doesn't matter, wasn't strength. It was positioning. When leaders publicly minimize something, it often means they feel it's slipping beyond their control. Because if Canada truly didn't matter, there would be no need to say it out loud. This is where democracy meets denial. Carney's reception wasn't about spectacle. It was about predictability, stability, agreements honored. In a global economy fatigued by volatility, that matters. Nations want partners who respect institutions, not impulse. So when you see those two images side by side, one leader embraced, one leader dismissing, you're not just watching diplomacy. You're watching leverage shift. Quietly. Deliberately. And that contrast. Yes, it likely rattled Trump, not because Canada is weak, but because it may no longer be dependent.
No real advantage to us. It's irrelevant to me. Canada would love it. Canada wants it. They need it. Because we don't need Canada product. That's the thing. You know, I want to be a nice person, but we don't need... I want to build the cars here, not in Canada. We used to build cars in Canada. Now, the Canada cars, the Canadians are moving here to build cars. Same thing with Mexico. Same thing with Japan. Japan's paid us billions and billions of dollars for the privilege of making cars here and selling cars.
This wasn't a routine diplomatic stop. Pause. It was a signal. Beijing wasn't just welcoming Mark Carney, it was broadcasting a message. Not only to Ottawa, but to Washington. State-level treatment. Carefully chosen language about a reset. Ceremonial elevation that says, we see value here. And that kind of reception doesn't happen out of courtesy. It happens when a country sees strategic opportunity. Here's what that really exposes. China isn't embracing Canada out of sentiment. It's responding to predictability. To agreements that hold. To a leader who understands trade-offs instead of issuing ultimatums. In a global system that's tired of volatility, stability becomes a currency of its own. And almost on cue, Donald Trump lashed out. When asked about trade, he waved it off. Said Canada needs the deal more than the United States. Claimed America doesn't need Canadian manufacturing. Insisted everything should be built at home. But let's be real for a moment. That wasn't strength. That was anxiety. When someone repeats, "It doesn't matter to me," it often means it matters deeply. Because this wasn't about cars. It wasn't about technical trade clauses. It was about leverage. For years, Trump's strategy rested on one core assumption: Canada had nowhere else to go. That the US market was so dominant, so unavoidable, that Ottawa would eventually bend under pressure. Tariffs, threats, public dismissal, it worked because the alternative was limited. That world is shifting. Europe is re-engaging. Asian markets are expanding. And now China, the world's second-largest economy, is offering Canada state-level engagement. That doesn't sever ties with the United States. It broadens the field. And here's the structural truth. Pressure only works when there are no alternatives. Threats only work when the target is isolated. Listen closely, this is the tell. Trump's tone has moved from confident to irritated. When he says Canada needs the deal more, he's reacting to something far more unsettling than trade policy. He's reacting to the loss of control. Because Carney isn't replacing America. He's reducing dependency. And that's a different kind of power shift. Quiet. Measured. Democratic in nature, rooted in diversification instead of domination. Once a country becomes optional to coerce, intimidation loses its force. That's why this moment matters.
Trade and tariffs are expected to top the agenda. Many embattled industries hoping that this trip leads to some relief on Chinese tariffs on agricultural products in this country. Meanwhile, in the auto industry, concern that that kind of relief could be tied to the lifting of Canadian tariffs on Chinese-made electric vehicles. Carney's visit comes as his government faces increasing pressure to forge new trade alliances.
Now this is where the story moves from optics to economics. China isn't just looking to ship electric vehicles into Canada. They're exploring something much deeper: factories, battery plants, full supply chains built on Canadian soil. Pause. That's infrastructure. That's jobs. That's long-term positioning. Cheaper, high-quality EVs for Canadians. Tens of thousands of skilled roles. Canada evolving into a serious manufacturing hub in the most competitive sector of the next decade. And here's what that really exposes. If Chinese EVs are built in Canada, they don't sit across an ocean. They sit right beside the US border. Competing on price. Competing on technology. Competing on scale. That's not a symbolic shift. That's structural competition. So when Donald Trump lashes out, it's worth asking why. Because this isn't about Canada being weak. It's about Canada no longer being dependent. That's the contradiction. The rhetoric says Canada needs the US. The reaction suggests something else entirely: concern about losing economic leverage. And it doesn't stop with autos. Carney's team is pushing hard on agriculture, canola, seafood, pork. Sectors that have absorbed real financial damage from years of tariff retaliation. Canadian farmers felt that pressure immediately. And for a long time, Ottawa had very limited room to maneuver. But that's changing. When China signals openness to stabilize agricultural trade, even incrementally, it sends a message: retaliation isn't permanent. Markets aren't fixed. Dependency isn't destiny. Listen closely, this is the shift. This visit isn't about choosing Beijing over Washington. It's about ending vulnerability to any single capital. For years, Canada's economy has been exposed to the political mood swings of one partner. When pressure came, options were narrow. And that imbalance was used strategically. Carney isn't replacing the United States. He's broadening Canada's field of play. That's a democratic principle in action: diversification over domination. Stability over coercion. Because a country with options negotiates calmly. A country with options resists pressure. A country with options can say no when it must. That's not spectacle. That's protection. And that's precisely why this moment feels unsettling to those who rely on leverage as their primary tool.
Hello, everyone. It is good to see you here on the ground in Beijing. I want to take a moment right off the top to stress the magnitude of this visit. The first visit to China by a Canadian Prime Minister since 2017. Prime Minister Carney received an explicit invitation from President Xi to come to China after conversations with Premier Li and President Xi in the fall of 2025.
Donald Trump can say Canada doesn't matter. But watch what the world is doing. A Canadian Prime Minister welcomed at the highest level in Beijing. Ceremonial recognition. Strategic language. Diplomatic elevation. At the same moment, a US president reacting from the sidelines. Pause. That contrast speaks louder than any press conference ever could. Here's what that really exposes. Power in the modern world isn't just about volume. It's about credibility. When a leader says something is irrelevant, yet reacts intensely to it, that's a contradiction worth noticing. Because global markets don't move on bravado, they move on predictability. And right now, the global economy is adjusting. Quietly. Methodically. Countries are diversifying. Reducing exposure. Hedging against volatility. That's not ideological, it's rational. This is where democracy meets maturity. Canada isn't cutting ties. It isn't staging defiance. It's doing something more disciplined, expanding its options. Refusing to be cornered. Refusing to operate on someone else's timetable. Under Mark Carney, the message is deliberate: Canada will engage widely, negotiate calmly, and protect its interests without theatrics. That's not speed for spectacle. That's momentum with purpose. And here's the deeper shift. For years, pressure worked because alternatives were limited. When you're boxed in, you negotiate under urgency. When you have options, you negotiate under clarity. Canada is no longer boxed in. So when Trump applies pressure, it doesn't land the same way. Because leverage weakens when dependency fades. And that's not an attack, it's a structural reality of global economics. This moment isn't about sides. It's about sovereignty. About ensuring no democracy is held hostage to mood swings or transactional politics. That's the real story behind the red carpets and the rhetoric.